What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another show of the Brave and Faithful podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Raiden Dionisio. Today, I have two best-selling authors. Both are Navy veterans. Um, they're veteran authors helping fellow veterans navigate post-combat struggles with faith-based fiction series. Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson. How you doing, guys?
We're doing great, man. It's good to be here with you. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate
Great to be here.
Appreciate y'all for taking the time. I mentioned you guys are both Navy veterans. Can you just explain to our audience briefly, what do y'all do in the Navy and how long y'all serve for?
Yeah, sure. I'm Brian, and I'm a former submarine officer. So I was on a fast attack nuclear submarine in the Pacific, sneaking around, underwater, spying on people and doing that sort of stuff. The type of boat that I was on was a 688 class submarine. We had vertical launch Tomahawks, and we carried cool stuff. We had a really advanced sonar suite and ADCAP torpedoes and really super Mcpadden processors and stuff like that. So it was a really fun boat because we got to do all kinds of interesting special missions, and had a great crew and really good time and in the Navy. And then when I got out, I became a Park Leadership Fellow and got my MBA. And so leadership in business has always been something I've been interested in. And then just somewhere along the way, I was doing the entrepreneurship thing. So I was writing and said, I'd kind of like to see if I could get a book published, but more as a hobby. And then I met Jeff at a writers conference, and we became fast friends and started partnering, and off we went. But that's sort of my history in a nutshell.
Awesome. Jeff?
Yeah, so mine is a little more schizophrenic and chaotic and hard to follow. So I'll give you the encapsulated version. I've done a lot of different things. My mom says I can't hold a job. I've been an actor and a firefighter paramedic, and I did some other things in the federal government earlier in my life. And then after a few years of that and living sort of a life filled with violence and unpleasantness, I decided to go to medical school. So I went to medical school and was in my residency. While I was in residency, I went back into the Navy. I had served before, and I was in the Navy Reserves just because I've always had a passion for serving. Whether it was my community as a fireman or in the military, and that's sort of a family thing. And then when 9/11 happened, like a lot of people, it just pissed me off. And so I transitioned back to active duty. I didn't mobilize as a reservist. I actually transitioned back onto active duty and deployed once with the Marines, which I know you can appreciate, worked closely with some very talented Navy corpsmen and very talented Marines on that first deployment. And while I was downrange, I ran into some folks from my spooky past who introduced me to some other weird, spooky people, and wound up found myself as a combat surgeon with Naval Special Warfare, working with the JSOC SEAL team, and that's what I did for the rest of the time. I sort of rounded out the service with a tour in a joint task force type environment, and I met, like you said, we met at a writers conference. I'll tell you what attracted me to the idea of partnering was that whole military connection, and I think this is something that you can appreciate. It's a different mindset. When you're transitioning out of the military and you start meeting civilians, you realize immediately, they do things a little differently. It's not right or wrong, but it's definitely different. And when you serve for any period of time, the idea of teamwork and mission before self, team before self, it just almost gets bonded into your DNA. And so the idea that two Navy veterans could work together and write together, as crazy as it sounds, writing a book together, I was like, this could work. We'd be no ego and we'll just work and make great books. And that was 15 or 20 books ago. So I would love to take credit. By the way, credit where credit is due. Is Brian's idea to partner up. We both were already writers. We were writing individually, and it was his idea to, he knew I'd worked in the special warfare community. He was in submarines. Like, we get together and write stuff, be like subs and SEALs, and I just couldn't imagine how it worked writing together. So I passed at first, not on the friendship. We were already good friends, but he finally wore me down, and thank goodness he did, because here we are. So
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that was gonna lead to my next question. Were you guys, how long you guys were writing before partnering, and what kind of led you all to become authors and writers? What inspired you all?
I'll let Brian tell his half because our stories are so different. They are the complete 180-degree opposite. In my case, as you saw, I've been a pilot and I've done all these other things. The schizophrenia of my professional life is tied together with writing. So I started writing when I was probably 8, 9 years old, and I published my first short story when I was like 14.
Wow.
And so writing, no matter what else I did in my life, writing was the creative thing that I always did. I wrote and published short stories my entire life, through every career I was ever in. And then eventually wanted to try my hand at, full length novel type fiction. And so I did that. And I had just published, I guess I had one, or maybe my second book had just come out. I can't remember. When I met Brian, I was about 2 books in, he was about 2 books in. And then, we met and decided to write together. So for me, writing was just part of me already. But Brian's story, Brian, yours, the complete opposite, right?
Yeah, I had never considered writing fiction. But when we were deployed on the sub, there are a lot of times you're just driving around rigged for ultra quiet. You're at 5 knots, and you're not even changing the bell for a whole watch sometimes. Especially in the engine room, if you're maneuvering, which is the engineering space where you got 4 guys in there and you're not changing anything. And how do you pass the time? And I quickly realized that one of the ways you keep morale up, one of the ways you keep things interesting is we would tell stories. And I'd collect people's stories. I ran through all of my own personal stories pretty quick. Then we pull and pour, I started collecting. Yeah, I'm a story collector. I'd collect them, the funny ones, and then I'd share like, oh, did you hear about, so-and-so on such and such boat, what he did, but I'd drag it out, the whole long story. And I got better at it as I went along. And it's funny because when I was getting out, one of the guys that I'd become friends with on the boat, he's like, Lieutenant, you're a pretty good storyteller. You ever thought about writing a book? I was like, no, I really haven't. But he put that bug in my brain, and it sort of stayed there. And I was like, maybe I could do this, And so my first book, I started right after business school, and it took me like 8 years to finish it. I just work on it at night, like 10:30 at night, my wife would fall asleep. I'd get over my computer in the dark and write a couple pages and stuff. And it wasn't until I kind of buckled down and got serious. It was like, I think I could do this. And I met Jeff. Really, I think it was tier 1 is when I thought, I don't like writing so much by myself, but as a team, it's really fun. Yeah. And maybe I can make this a career. And we did.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think the best stories are the ones like from deployments, right? Like the sea stories that you hear. You get to pull from everybody, whatever they tell you.
Definitely.
So I mentioned in the beginning the stories, the fiction stories you guys were talking about were faith-based fiction series. Has that always been kind of like your genre when you guys have been writing, or did that just shift to that and you guys were doing something before?
It's funny they use the word shift because people use that when we interview a lot. We have the second book in our faith-based series, The Shepards, is out, just came out this past week. So the whatever it is, 17, 18, whatever books before that are not faith-based, but they're very character-driven. And so they deal with issues of, human frailty, relationships in operators. We do high concept geopolitical thrillers, but we don't make them about that part of the story as much as the relationships of the people and the characters. And so when we had the opportunity, we'd actually been talking about this faith-based story for a couple of years before we actually were able to do it. And then that's another whole story, how it just it felt like a God moment that just sort of fell into our laps, if you will, through a series of events. But so we've been writing other stuff, but when we had this opportunity, people are always like, oh, you pivoted to this. We don't really feel that way. I don't feel like we pivoted. I feel like because we write things that are very character driven and about the impact of war and covert operations on people and relationships and families, the idea of adding this additional layer of faith, or in this case, perhaps crisis in faith, just seemed very natural. When we think about questions of God and his role in your life, or, what it means to you, what you believe, what you don't believe, those questions at least are universal. Like there's no human being that hasn't asked them. And if you look at military, they're asked a little bit more frequently, right? When you're in the suck, they're coming up, those questions. And so for us, adding that layer of, faith just seemed like a very natural progression of developing good, rich characters. And then of course, the opportunity to share some backstory messages about how you deal with crisis and the nature of good and evil. Those of us that have been downrange like yourself, you've seen things that, good and evil is abstract until the first time you're in the sandbox and saw some of the horrible things that humans can do to one another. And all of a sudden you had to confront that. You had to say, this is, I see what evil is now. It's not an abstract thing. It's something real that exists in our world. And so being able to weave that into a story as a storyteller, obviously that's just enormously rich fodder. But as, fathers and service members and believers, it was an enormous opportunity. So it's not something we always intended to do, or maybe even ever intended to do. Right. But it was a very, very natural fit and an easy thing for us to take on.
How much of, and maybe I kind of know the answer to this, but if you can explain to our audience, how much of the books, the stories that you guys have written are based on your guys' real life experiences, or maybe other people's experiences?
I mean, I think when you're a storyteller, you write about things. They always say write about what you know. That's an old author adage, and there's truth to that. So we write about what we know. You write about people that you know. So I think there's a couple components to answer this question. There's one is, we write about the things that we experienced, the things that impacted us, the things that we're intellectually curious about, or maybe things that are cathartic to tell in fiction. There's that component. Right. There's also sort of the celebrating the accomplishments and humor and grit of the people that we serve with. So people always ask us, is this character based on, somebody Yeah, every character is based on an amalgam of the people that Jeff and I have served with, people that we know in our daily lives. We sort of cherry pick character traits and anecdotes and things like that. And then I think the last thing is that, we care about OPSEC. So we try to fictionalize things, and we incorporate drama because it is fiction. It's supposed to be fun. It's not just about a bunch of people sitting around the picnic table for 12 hours waiting to go on mission. So we try to incorporate, those dramatic elements. And, in the end of the day, what we want to do is create a story that, honors the people that we served with, is exciting, for people who've never served, or if you have served and you're now a veteran, it maybe transports you back to that time in your life. You feel like it's authentic. Authenticity is important to us. And then the last thing is, we want to have a message, and I'll let Jeff talk about that a little bit too, but that's important to our fiction. We're not just trying to thrill, but we also have some other things going on in our storytelling.
Yeah. And I think that, that idea of a message, that didn't start with the faith-based series. I think that's always been the case. In tier 1, Valor, we've tried you're in a small unit, doing small unit tactics, that brotherhood that forms. There's good and bad impacts on those relationships. And we like to show that in our storytelling. Here, we had the opportunity to tackle some other issues, this idea of crisis and faith. I can tell you that some of that did come from our personal experience, maybe mine in particular. After my second or third deployment, I had seen and done some things that really made me question. So these elements of crisis and faith that you see in Jedediah Johnson, the main character of Dark Intercept and Dark Angel, he struggles with these questions of good and evil and what's God's role. For me, I never stopped believing in God. It wasn't a crisis of faith. I knew he was up there. I simply got to this point where I was like, if he is up there, I kind of don't know what he's doing. Like he's asleep at the wheel, or he doesn't care, or what's going on. And everybody that has seen some of the things you see in war are going to have those feelings. I think it's very common. I actually lead a military ministry at a very large church down in Tampa. And that's something that we deal with all the time. That's very common. This idea of, it's not that I stop believing in God. It's just that I'm mad at him. Like, why would you let this happen? Why would you let these buddies die? Why would you let these children get beheaded in the desert? Horrible things that you see. You know what I'm talking about. And so I struggled with those things for a number of years. And because it's so common, the opportunity to weave some of that into this story and perhaps leave a reader with some, not just questions, but maybe even some breadcrumbs of where some answers lie, was kind of an exciting opportunity for us.
So, I mentioned in the beginning how you guys are helping veterans who are struggling with post-combat stress and things like that. With the success that you guys have had, how many books, by the way, have you all written?
I think it's
Well, we've written a lot. Not all of them they're in different stages of publication. So
I guess if you include the ones that are coming out, that are under contract and are written and are just not out yet, it's about, I think it's right at about 20, 21 or 22, something like that.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, the series, there's the Tier 1, the Sons of Valor, and the Shepards.
And the Shepards, we also wrote an installment for W.E.B. Griffin's Presidential Agent, and we have some new techno thriller. So yeah, it's like 20, somewhere around 20 or 21 books that are written, some of them still coming out. So yeah, the Tier 1 series, that's our sort of our tentpole series. That's where we started as Andrews and Wilson. 6 books in that series. The 7th one just got finished and will be coming out in about 10 months. We have the Sons of Valor series, next installment in June. We have this Shepherd series that we just love, that the 2nd book just came out. And then we have a new techno thriller series coming up, starting with a book called Sandbox in 2023. So we've got a lot going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned over 20 books that you guys have written throughout the course of years, right? For anybody that might be listening in and are interested in becoming a writer or, an author writing a novel one day, what are some tips or advices that you can provide for them, to take that first step?
I think the first thing we would say is, don't be afraid to just write. Writers write. And I think a lot of people get bogged down with trying to make it perfect. I know personally that was one of my problems when I first started, is I was always polishing the cannonball, to use a Navy term, so I'd go back and I'd rework the stuff that I, wrote the day before, and instead of just charging forward. So, don't be afraid. It doesn't have to be perfect on your first draft. Get your book written. Try to write the whole book. I can't tell you how many people I meet on a daily basis that when they ask me what I do and I tell them I'm a novelist, they'll say, oh, well, I have an idea for a story. I'd like to write it someday. I've started it, but, I never can get around to it. There's a lot of people with ideas for stories. There's a lot.
Right.
But writing the actual book is the hard part. So just start writing that book. And then I think, as you're writing the book, you should be looking at, the market and looking at, what type of story do I want to tell? Is there another author that inspires you? Is there a genre that gets you excited? Do you know where you want your book to be? Do you know what kind of story you want to tell? So you really need to think about, begin with the end in mind. That's another little writing adage. So we say that a lot to people. Begin with the end in mind and have an idea where you want to go. It doesn't mean you can't change or redirect on the course, but at least start that direction. Jeff, I'll hand it off to you because I'm sure you've got a couple of things to try.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that, people are paralyzed by this need for perfection. And I think the reason for that is that everybody that envisions that they'd like to write is a reader, right? That's how you fall in love with books, by reading books.
Yeah.
And you start to get this idea that you could write a book because you love to read them. But the problem is the book that you read that you're like, I want to do that, has been written, rewritten again, and then edited, line edited, copy edited, polished, and now it's on the shelf. You're not seeing the first draft of that book.
Yeah, like, seeing the journey.
Exactly. And so I think that's what happens when you first start writing. As you're writing, you read your last paragraph and you're like, oh, that's garbage. Well, first of all, it's not garbage. It's if you have a story to tell, you just tell the story. So I agree with what Brian said. You got to just say, I'm going to go start to finish. The other thing, I think that, just like everyone else, we didn't start out by quitting our day jobs and
Mhm.
writing full time, right? Because we have wives and children who would have been very, very angry. So it's a balancing act. And so the only other advice that I give commonly to writers that are starting out is you don't have to make it your full-time job, but you got to make it a job. And what I mean by that is you can't, if you think you're going to write by, writing 10 hours on every other Sunday, you're not going to do that. A full writing day is like 3 or 4 hours of writing. Now I'm not trying to say we're lazy. There's a lot of other business aspects that go into our careers. And so we're working long, full days now with 4 books a year. But the actual creative process, you're not going to get more than 3 hours at a time without taking a significant break. So if you're trying to do all of your writing on one day, it's going to take you 8 years, right, Brian? So,
Yeah.
And so what I tell people is like, look, set realistic goals. Like whatever you set time to go to the gym, you set time for your wife, you need to put that into your schedule. You say, these are the 4 days or 5 days that I'm going to write for an hour and a half, not 5 hours, just an hour and a half. If you can do that and put a few hundred words on the page, 500, 600, that many times, you're writing a book in like 9 months. It's amazing how fast it goes. But you're not starting over again. If you wait a whole week, half of your writing time was spent reading what you wrote before, scratching your head, trying to get back into the story and the characters. So I agree with everything Brian said, and then just the rigor of scheduling the time for it.
And I think you need to ask yourself, why am I writing this book? Am I writing it for myself? Am I writing it to impress my friends? Is it something I want a small group of people to be able to read and enjoy? Or do I want to try to make a bunch of money and make this a career? Like, what is your goal? Because I will tell you that, you see the Cinderella stories. Those are the ones that are fun. They get attention in the media. So-and-so wrote a book. He was driving an Uber and it sold for 7 figures and now blah, blah, blah. He's a millionaire. Okay, well, that's like 0.00001% of the writers out there. The truth of the matter is, this is like any other business. It would be like saying tomorrow, I want to go play as starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. And you had no training, you never played football a day in your life. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that's a very competitive business, becoming the starting quarterback of an NFL team. And so it's the same thing with writing. You don't, like Jeff said, you see the finished product, but you don't realize there's a lot of craft and strategy and time and networking and business that goes into getting this book finished, properly marketed and distributed out into the network. And the competition is very, very intense. So, I think last year there were something like 2 million titles printed. A lot of those were self-published, probably 250,000 were traditionally published and the rest were all self-published. That's a lot of material. And that's hard to get noticed, in that environment. So to have realistic expectations, otherwise I think it's going to be potentially a soul-crushing experience for you. If you have this unrealistic goal that you're going to write a book and you're going to sell it for 7 figures and you're going to be famous, it's your first book.
And the last thing to say, and we'll wrap this part up, is you better be writing because you love to write. If your passion is being a writer, being a famous writer, but you don't really enjoy writing that much, you're in really bad way, because that's worse than any other job you ever hated. If you hate sitting down and writing, you're going to be a miserable person. So if you love the story, tell the story and hope that it works out, but you'll still have enjoyed the process. So.
Yeah, those are sage and great advice. And from what I'm hearing, it's basically like anything, right? Like anything you want to get better at or good at, it takes reps, like going to the gym. You can't just expect to lift 500 pounds on your first day. It takes the consistent discipline to practice that craft. So.
And it takes community. That's the other thing is, you need to be with a brotherhood of writers, just like you were when you were in the military and you had that brotherhood. And I think that everything we said applies to whatever a transitioning veteran is looking to do. You need to find something you have a passion for. You need to dedicate yourself to it. You need to find a way to take all of that experience that you got in the military and apply it to this. And then remember, there's still a community out there. Those guys you served with, they're out too. They're doing something. They know someone. So there's a network of these guys. So I think the hardest part in transitioning, whether you're transitioning to a writer or to start your own business or go to PA school, whatever it is, the hardest part for the military guys are you feel like you've been ripped out of your entire identity because it's so wrapped up in who you are and what you do and your unit and your brothers. And when you lose that, it's jarring. And so remind yourself, you didn't lose that. Those guys are still out there. Yeah, maybe we're not deploying, but they're a phone call away and they want to help you and you want to help them, and that brotherhood can continue. So I think that's probably the best advice we can give, no matter what the job they're looking for is.
Awesome. So Jeff and Brian, talk to us a little bit about, when you guys were first starting out, what were some of those obstacles and maybe difficulties that you guys had to overcome in the beginning, and how did you guys overcome those moments?
I mean, it's persistence. Every writer there's a few Cinderella stories like Brian was saying, but 90% of the writers, especially the people that we're close and friends with, will tell you the same story, that they don't consider themselves a Cinderella story. They're a blue collar writer, right? They started in the mailroom and worked their way up. And so that's a struggle that you have to prepare for. I think that for a lot of people, the rejection is difficult. Because there's a lot of it. You write a manuscript and then you got to get an agent. So you query a couple dozen agents and 20 people tell you that it's no good or they don't want it or whatever. And same thing, once you get an agent, it comes to the publisher. You have to remind yourself that, it's not an indictment of your work or of you. It's just that wasn't the fit. And so when you submit your work to somebody and they're like, yeah, I don't like it, that doesn't mean it's no good. It means they don't like it. And they may not watch the same TV shows you watch either. That doesn't mean they're not good TV shows. So I think that the rejection is hard for a lot of people because it is a career that begins with an inordinate, when you say, Brian, amount of rejection, more than I can think of for almost any other career, maybe music, any other arts, I suppose, but there's a lot of it. And so you got to have thick skin. And I think we overcame it by, well, first of all, we were very lucky. Both of us got our first works published, which is unusual. We've published everything we've ever written. That's also unusual. But we still had our fair share of rejection. And so it was just tenacity and confidence. You just say, look, it's not for you, it's for somebody.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, when I was young, like high school, college age, I remember I just had this belief that I believe in meritocracy. Like that's always been the core of my being. And I guess I just believe that, if I showed up, if I worked really hard and did a better job than everybody else, then, I would ascend and people would take notice because, if you get the best grade, of course, the professor is going to like you the most, right? But that's just not, this is an unsophisticated view of the world. And so now, over the years, I've come to realize that every business is a relationship-driven business, including publishing. It's a relationship-driven business. There are a lot of gatekeepers in this world. And if you think that you might have written the world's best novel, I mean, you could be Charles Dickens reincarnated. It might be the best piece of fiction anyone's ever written. And I guarantee it will never see the light of day if you just think that by trying to throw it out there, people will notice it. That's just not realistic. It's not how the industry works. So you have to do the relationship part of the business. And that means you need to go to conferences. You need to meet people face to face. You need to have your elevator pitch down so that when somebody asks you about your book, you don't fumble. You got it down, man. Like 90 seconds, you can tell them about this book and hook them and make them want to ask you the next question about it. And it's that ability to communicate verbally. It's that ability to think about your brand and your platform and how you present yourself. Those things are really, really important. You can't just write a book and think you can hand it off and that's the end of the story. That's just the beginning of the story.
So Brian and Jeff, we talked about your guys's, some of the difficulties you had in the beginning, starting off as a writer and author. Tell our audience a little bit about, some of the most rewarding moments or experiences you guys have had since, writing 20 plus or so books, novels.
Well, I won't speak for both of us, but my guess is it's similar for Brian. But for me, it's stuff like this. It's connecting with fellow veterans and service members and law enforcement and other people who have served. We have had opportunities to forge relationships with our fellow veterans that we wouldn't have been able to do without this. So, we've done appearances at Pearl Harbor, and actually, you got to go to Gitmo. Brian went to Gitmo.
Oh wow.
I did.
We've been at McDill, and we've been at Oceana. We've done all these really cool military appearances. We got to meet guys who were in training at the JFK Warfare Center at Bragg. And I think for me, the most rewarding, obviously, the ego part of as a writer, getting a great review, hitting a bestseller list, though I'm not trivializing it. Those things are great, and I do love them. But nothing quite tops the relationships that we forged within the veteran and law enforcement and military communities as a result of our writing.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And we've met some really great veteran authors too. What's
Yeah.
cool about the space today is that, 20 years ago you had Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum, and these guys were great researchers and they were great storytellers, but they were not military veterans. Tom Clancy went out on a submarine and they gave him unfettered access, and he followed people around. He asked all kinds of questions, and you saw that he got a lot of details from his trips, but he wasn't actually sitting in the chair. He wasn't giving orders. He wasn't actually, taking the ship to periscope depth on the con. And so now when you have like myself and Jeff, combat surgeon, he knows what it's like to be in combat. He knows what it's like when someone's dying in front of you. You have Don Bentley, he's an Apache pilot. He was in combat flying an Apache. You have Josh Hood, you have Ward Larson, you have this great group of fellow veterans who are now getting to tell stories. And I think that that's been very exciting to see the genre evolve to where the people that actually were doing these heroic activities are the ones that get to tell the stories now.
You mentioned Clancy and Ludlow. I talked to a few authors on the podcast. Seems like that's where they get some of their influence from. Is that the same for you too, or?
Maybe to an extent. We certainly, both of us grew up reading Clancy, and don't get me wrong, I love Clancy, but certainly we write very differently than he does. I think, I grew up reading Stephen King and, Dean Koontz, these people that write, well, first of all, I love that genre of supernatural thrillers, but they write very character-driven things. Whereas Clancy, who is a master, and I'm not taking anything away from him, he wrote things that were about the geopolitics and the machinery of war, and very technical, amazing stories, but not as much about the relationships and the toll and that kind of stuff. There was some of it. So I think I probably take more inspiration from a writer like King than I do from Clancy, but certainly my love of the high concept geopolitical stuff comes from Clancy and Ludlum and, John le Carre and people like that growing up.
Awesome. So, you guys mentioned earlier, you gave our audience some tips and advice as far as like how to start with their writing. Is there some sort of method that you guys use as far as like, you mentioned about writing an hour and a half a day? Like if we go deeper into that, is there some sort of method you guys use? Like what you guys start writing the end, or like how does that work?
So, I think every writer has that, but I'm not sure that there's a thing that we can pitch to you that is like what you should do. I think it's different for everybody. Brian, what do you think? How would you answer that?
You have to find your own voice and your own method. We know writers that are outliners, there's this expression in the industry, sort of a term of art. It's like, are you a pantser or are you a plotter? And a pantser is somebody who writes by the seat of their pants, and it's basically they sit down at the computer, they don't know what they're going to write that day, and it just comes out. A plotter is more methodical. Yeah, like write the outline and fill it in over time. And so, where do you fall on that spectrum? And you can be in the middle. You can write a rough outline. We're sort of in the middle. We write a very, very loose outline, and then we let the plot sort of and the characters inform us as we go along. But it's not like the Wild West where we just show up, and we're like, no idea what we're going to write. We're both just writing whatever we want. No, we brainstorm and we come up with a plan, very, very military like, right? We have our plan, our op board for the day, and he's going to write this and I'm going to write that. And then we come back and we share the information. I mean, co-authoring is different than if you're going to write solo. And I think if you're solo, starting off maybe with a little more structure is probably a good place until you get your system intact.
I like what you said there. You said pantser or plotter. It's kind of like a machine gunner or a sniper, kind of like.
That's right.
Awesome. So Jeff and Brian, going into our second segment of the podcast. So this is what I call the Fast Five. So these are the same 5 questions asked all my guests. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
All right. Those. So first question: what's one hobby other than writing you enjoy?
Well, my favorite hobby besides writing, this is a recent hobby, is fitness, trying to get back into shape. When you sit in this chair, and I've been out of the military as long as I have, the pandemic, I was like, I could just eat myself to death. It'd be fun. I could gain a lot of weight, or, maybe I could try to do more than one pull-up. So for the past 18 months in my spare time, I've been watching, Athlete Next videos and things online about, how do I, and especially in middle age, how do I get in shape and train and get stronger without shredding my joints and stuff. So that's been my hobby, fitness.
Okay.
So for me, this is with 4 series, and now we've got some media stuff going on. It's gotten very, very busy, and got a lot of kids at home still. So I try to give as much of my free time to the family as I can. And we all are very active at our church. So I lead a men's military ministry that takes up a fair amount of time. And then we have church on Saturday. My 2 middle children are in the praise and worship band. So that's like a huge commitment of being over there for rehearsals and stuff. We do a lot of family stuff. We love the beach. We love skiing. We love outdoor activities, but for the most part, we do them together.
Yeah, definitely important. Faith and family, top 2 important.
There you go.
We just did our first joint Anderson Wilson family vacation. So both our families, we went out to Grand Canyon. That's awesome. We're best friends, so why shouldn't our families be best friends? Was kind of our logic. But we did a bunch of cookouts and barbecues and hanging out. It was a good time.
Yeah, that was great.
Awesome. Next question: if you had to choose one person, dead or living, to hang out with for one day, who would it be and why?
Brian?
Well, I know yours is probably Stephen King, right? Because you'd like to get into the mind of that man.
I wouldn't mind picking his brain. There's to pick one is like crazy. Like I've heard that question so many times. Like I don't think I could pick one, because you say one and then another one, and you're like, oh, well, this guy, and it's everything from the founding fathers. I would love to sit down with Thomas Jefferson and pick his brain, and I think he was a political genius. And then there's like inventors and pilots. I was a pilot for a while. Boy, wouldn't it be cool if I could sit down with Chuck Yeager? And oh my gosh, I don't think I could do it, dude. Like I've already ruined it. I've already ruined your question.
Pick 5. I mean, I think I would pick, either Neil Armstrong, because just to have that, just to know what it was like to step onto the moon. I think the moon shot it still has this place in anyone who's got an adventuresome spirit, or just that tenacity of human engineering. I mean, that moonshot, that we actually accomplished that goal. I don't know, just to talk to someone who was a part of that. I feel like we need that again, as a species, as a country, we need that again. I'd either want to talk to him, or I'd want to talk to Admiral Rickover, who's the father of the submarine program, because I might have a few comments, things I'd like to say to him.
Interesting conversation there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know you guys have written plenty of books, but recommend another book for our audience to read.
I can do it right now because I just finished it and it just came out. This is the guy we were telling you about, Josh Hood. He's a military veteran. Josh is served with the 82nd Airborne, did several tours, and afterwards he served in as a law enforcement SWAT team sniper in Memphis. So this is a guy that knows how to write about action. So he now writes the Treadstone series. This is the third book in this series, Robert Ludlum's Treadstone. And they're all good, but I got to tell you, this might be the best of the three. I actually posted a video literally just today on social media promoting this book because I'm so impressed. So that's definitely one not to miss.
And then that's the Treadstone Transgression. Right?
That's correct.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, and there's lots of thriller authors I could recommend. Like I said, Don Bentley's a good choice, or Josh Hood, but I'll go ahead and recommend a nonfiction book called We March at Midnight by Ray Mcpadden. And this is a very powerful memoir about Ray's time in service in Afghanistan. And he's a Blackstone author. We're Blackstone authors, but he's really gifted writer. And I think if anyone listening, especially someone who maybe hasn't served for as long or hasn't served in Afghanistan, and you want to understand what impact did this have on the men and women who served there over the last 2 decades, this is a great book. We March at Midnight.
All right. And then for our audience, again, that's Treadstone, Transgression, and We March at Midnight for the 2 recommended books. Next question, guys. What's your favorite quote and why?
You're killing me.
I'll go first because you've gone first every time. So my favorite quote is "Comparison is the death of joy" by Mark Twain. And I think this is particularly poignant, especially in today's world of social media. We are now in a world where every single thing we do, we are expected to sort of post and share and compare to other people. And I think it is a recipe for psychological disaster. Twain recognized this, in the 1800s, and it's worse today. When you look at what somebody else has, what somebody else seems to have accomplished, remember that you are not getting to see that journey. We talked about the journey before.
Right.
You cannot benchmark yourself against other people who you don't know how long they've been at it. You don't know how much money they've invested, how much time they've invested, how many people are helping them. So benchmark against yourself. Look at what you've set a goal and compare yourself to where you were, last week, 6 months ago, 2 years ago. And I promise you, you will be a much happier and more motivated individual.
You versus you.
Yes.
There you go. You versus you. Mine's going to sound a little bit like a cop-out, but it's scripture. And my quote is from Isaiah 6:8. You're probably familiar with this one. It's where God is calling out to Isaiah, and he says, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And Isaiah replies, "Here am I, send me." And that scripture is powerful for me because it is a quote from the Bible that reminds me of my time in service. When I think of the men and women that I served with, especially those who that we've lost, that's the scripture that comes to mind. A lot of people love, no greater love hath a man than he lay down his life for a friend from the book of John. And I love that too. But this one talks about the people I knew, because everyone that I knew that I served were there by choice, and they were there for the brothers next to them. And it sort of encapsulates that service. When I think of the teammates that we lost in 2011 on August 6th in Extortion 1-7, I think of that scripture, because what I know about those men is, had they known that a trap was being laid for them, every single one of them would have been more insistent that they be on that helicopter with their brothers, because they are just the type of people that say, "Here am I, send me." So that's mine.
All right. Appreciate y'all for sharing those. Final question here. Where do you all see yourself, with all the success that you guys have had, the series and everything? Where do you guys see yourself in 5 years or even 10 years from now?
Tired.
That's a good question. Tired is one. Okay, so we talk a lot about this, and I think one of the strengths of our partnership is that we both encourage each other, and we also try to set those goals, and we make sure we're on the same page. And so one of the things that we've talked a lot about recently is the fact that, yes, we are novelists, but we also consider ourselves just storytellers. I think in today's world, there's these other mediums, film and television and video games and shorts and audiobooks. And not everybody is comfortable just consuming, their stories in the printed book. So one of our big goals is to get our stories into some of these other mediums. And we've started to make some headway into that. So Jeff, I'm going to hand it off to you so you can talk about the other half of that story.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We started a few years ago, like you said, deciding that, you can't just tell stories in one media because the generational differences. There are people in their mid-20s now who've never read a novel and maybe never will because they watch movies, they consume video games and that sort of thing. And that's great. I'm not saying that as an indictment, but if you want the world to know your stories, you better be everywhere. So we're very blessed that the series that we're talking about today, the Shepards, with Dark Intercept and Dark Angel, has already been optioned for television and is in the early stages of development. We also, I think we can't drop too much information here, but we just signed a deal with a major film studio to bring another one of our stories, one that's not out yet, doesn't actually come out for 2 years, but that book has already been optioned and is in early development as a feature film. And we actually have like 3 or 4 other things that we're in various stages of negotiating and development. So it's an exciting time for us. We love telling stories. We love writing. We never will stop. But 5 years from now, I think we both envision that we'll have a much more eclectic mix of venues for our stories.
Mm-hmm. And again, for those listening in, the latest series, The Shepards, with Dark Intercept and Dark Angel, make sure you guys go check that out. We'll be out by the time this podcast is out. So Brian, Jeff, congrats on all the success, the deals that you guys are getting. So one final thing before we go here, where can our audience, where can they follow you, or where can they support you?
Yeah, thanks for that. The easiest way, because we have so much going on, is to just go to our website. It's andrews-wilson.com. And there's an opportunity to sign up for a newsletter there. I will tell you, everyone says, sign up for my newsletter. We don't spam you. We don't share your address. It's just a way to get information of when the next book is coming, when the film is coming out, that sort of thing. There's also some opportunities for our readers on the website to share their stories, share their pictures, and see some things going on in our personal lives. But most importantly, in addition to all that, we have a partners page where we help promote veteran-owned businesses that we partner with, like Bone Frog Coffee, important organizations like Seal Legacy Foundation, All Secure Foundation, run by Tom and Jen Satterley, and various other resources for veterans and their families. So andrews-wilson.com, there's anything, if it's about us, it's there, that's for sure.
And if you're into social media, you can find us on Instagram at Andrews and Wilson. That's our handle, Andrews and Wilson.
So Andrews and Wilson on Instagram, andrews-wilson.com, the website. And again, the latest books are Dark Intercept and Dark Angel on the Shepherd series. Jeff, Brian, thanks again for you guys' time, and look forward to hearing from you all soon.
Anytime, brother, and anything we can do for you, please do not hesitate. You know how to get us now.
Awesome. I appreciate y'all. Take care.
Take it easy.
See ya.